Let's get into an important topic called hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. First, we'll walk through the pathophys, and then we'll take a look at various maneuvers once again, in which you will clearly be able to see as to how these maneuvers are going to affect that particular pathology. In hypertrophic obstructive, now, there is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in general, okay, and that is a general type of cardiomyopathy, HCM, along with RCM and DCM. Those are all different types of cardiomyopathies. The one that we will focus upon is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, specifically the obstructive type. What does that even mean? This is the one in which the outflow tract from the left ventricle going into the aorta. Do you see the arch of aorta there in dark green? And there's the left ventricle and antechamber. And it's the fact that you have blood that is then, or should be, ejected from your left ventricle into the aorta, correct? Well, I want you to pay attention to the interventricular septum. And the outflow tract would be exactly as it would imply, the outflow of blood from your left ventricle into the aorta. And the interventricular septum that you're seeing there, and only, exclusively, on the left side, you have asymmetrical hypertrophy of the left side of the interventricular septum. Slow down there, listen to what I just said, and make sense of this picture. That interventricular septum that you're seeing there, with asymmetrical hypertrophy, moving into the chamber of the left ventricle, is causing obstruction of the outflow. Let me ask you a question. Who is this patient? Patient. Inspiration, leaning back. Ow! I have chest pain. Well, what then causes your chest pain to be relieved? Hey, doc, leaning forward. Expiration. What does that mean to you? Pericarditis. Why do I bring this up? Why was there increased pain upon leaning back and inspiration? Inspiration increases the amount of blood, and with leaning back, pericarditis is my diagnosis, in which the space between the pericardial cavity is then going to cause friction, and hence the pain. Why do I bring that up? Because the two layers here that you want to be able to keep separate so that the intensity of the murmur is going to be decreased would be that outflow tract. So if you're able to keep the left-sided asymmetrical hypertrophy away from the wall of the aortic valve, then guess what? You're able to decrease the intensity of the murmur. Now, who is this patient? Unfortunately, it's a patient in which would seem, for all intent and purposes, perfectly normal. In fact, perhaps even too normal in terms of being maybe a star athlete. So there's nothing in terms of obesity, in terms of maybe lack of proper nutrition and such, and that would contribute to this issue. And genetically speaking, autosomal dominant, one of the major contractile fibers is beta myosin, which is then affected in this patient, resulting in asymmetrical hypertrophy and obstruction of the outflow. And so therefore, the closer that the outflow tract gets, the worse off is the intensity of the murmur, and the fact that the patient is going to have such little cardiac output. The next time that he or she goes for an exertional type of activity, collapses onto the floor, never to get up ever again. Sad. So, your next question is, what kind of maneuvers are you going to perform? Are you going to see? What kind of drugs might you want to give? In which, what do you want to do here? With obstruction, you want to relieve the murmur by increasing the space of the outflow tract. How would you go about doing that? How about increasing the amount of blood in the outflow tract? How about increasing the amount of preload in your left ventricle so that you keep the areas separate and apart? And by doing so, would you be able to alleviate the symptoms of the patient and perhaps even save your patient? Oh my goodness, yes. And so therefore, what kind of drugs might you be thinking about? What kind of drug might you want to give so that you would be keeping more blood in your heart, please? A negative or positive inotropic agent. a negative inotropic agent, such as a beta blocker, such as a calcium channel blocker. By doing so, you then create negative inotropy, increased preload, and separation of your outflow tract. Quite different, isn't it, when compared to aortic stenosis and such? It's still a systolic murmur, this is, hypertrophic obstructive. Where would you hear this? We talked about this earlier as well. Hypertrophic obstructive. Take a look at the arch of aorta. Normally, where would you hear the aortic valve? Second intercostal space, right peristernal. And then the outflow tract would be towards the apex. It would be approximately third intercostal and left peristernal. Is that clear? It's a systolic murmur, both aortic stenosis and hypertrophic obstructive. But the locations are different based on the anatomy that you're seeing here. Let's continue. Physical examination, a systolic ejection murmur, heard where over the aortic area, similar to aortic stenosis, but the outflow tract. So you could technically and will technically hear it on the left peristernal. Murmur, now, be careful, take your time. You want that separation of the outflow tract, correct? You with me? If you want the separation of the outflow tract, you want less or more blood in your heart. You want there to be more blood in your heart so that you have more separation of the outflow tract. When you do a Valsalva maneuver, phase 2 is what I assume you know that this is referring to. Then there's decreased venous return to the left side. There is going to be less blood in your heart. Pay attention. When there's less blood in your heart, tell me about the outflow tract. It's closer together. What then happens to the intensity of the murmur? It will worsen. What if you're standing up? Same concept. Standing up, the blood is in your legs, therefore you have decreased return to the heart, thus worsening of HOCM, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. Versus, what if you squat quickly? You increase your venous return. Quickly squatting. Remember, this is not a TET spell, huh? Rapid squatting, increase the amount of blood to your heart, and so therefore you're thinking about your outflow tract, which is now more separated. What if you do a hand grip? If you do a hand grip, what's interesting is that you will be referring to what? More of an influence on your afterload, resulting in its increase. Thus, there is going to be more blood left where? In your left ventricle. Is that clear? So therefore, what happens to separation? It's increased. What happens to intensity of the murmur? It diminishes. Now, if you've understood all of this, you're in great shape with HOCM. Now, as we progress, we're going to put all the murmurs together with all the different maneuvers. And you probably want to keep coming back to this lecture series so that you see as to how well you've understood this material, and then it becomes part of your unconscious reflex. The physical examination, double beat, bifid, or spike in dome carotid pulse. Hypertrophic obstructive. It differs from aortic stenosis, which has what's known as what? Slow and delayed up in the carotid. Remember that? It's called pulsus parvis a tardis. Delayed, and it is going to be slowed with aortic stenosis. Whereas it's bifid, kind of like a double beat when you have hypertrophic obstructive. Not the same thing.